residents. Community recreation. Okay, we can go on to the next slide, please. Just to give you some information on the conference at a glance, this was the conference I attended in Bonn, Germany in May. There were 371 participants from 44 different countries, 217 speakers from 5 continents, and 62 local government representatives from 26 cities. Some of the key themes of the conference were with regards to disaster risk reduction and resiliency approaches. And part of what we just talked about earlier tonight about urban gardening and urban agriculture, recreation are part of building resilience. We'll talk about that in a minute. Community-based risk assessments, which is really getting input from the community on how we prevent risk, how we prevent different problems from happening, disaster risks basically. Strategic collaborative partnerships, and I'll give you some examples of those that I learned about at the conference. Integrating food security and urban agriculture into resilient communities, as I had just mentioned. And probably one of the key themes was how do you pay for it? So this was really a global issue that was discussed at this conference with the 44 countries of how do we pay for it. And resilience, what is resilience? It's the capacity and the ability of a community to withstand stress, survive, adapt, and bounce back from a crisis or disaster and rapidly move forward. And just one second. And this crisis, this is whether it's what we're having in the United States, financial crisis, recession, it can be disaster, man-made disaster, it can be natural disaster, but it's become more prominent as we look at the next slide, please. If you look at this map, this graph here, you can't really see, but the blue line is natural disasters that have been going up since the 70s. You can see the increase, and we hear about them. Tsunamis, you hear about floods, we've had hurricanes. I mean, there is a trend when you look at it that we are experiencing worldwide more natural disasters. And the gray is man-made disasters. So that is how if you look at things like fires that we do ourselves, committing a fire, or you even wonder about the hurricanes that hit in Louisiana when dams broke. Is that a combination of a man-made and a natural disaster because the dams weren't able to withstand it? So some of the observations is that rapid urban growth and climate challenges are converging in dangerous ways. And this was something that was discussed through the theme of the conference. Resilience and adaptation plans are needed. We'll talk about Copenhagen in a minute, but one of the things that Copenhagen realizes is you have 3 years after disaster to do something that people forget after 3 years. So we haven't had a hurricane here since 2005. You don't really see any preparation, you forget after 3 years. So they've capitalized on some recent disaster that they had. And the need to include views, ideas, and knowledge from local communities. The partnership idea was a theme that resonated throughout the conference of how governments are partnering with different municipalities, different agencies, etc. Thanks. This was a quote from the conference: guiding urban development towards resilience is always better and cheaper than only engineering infrastructure to withstand possible hazards. Cities must be proactive instead of reactive. And that's a challenge in how do you finance things being proactive. It's easy to finance it when the hurricane's already hit and you have to clean the streets and get the electric going on, but how do you finance and prep for it? There was an issue in, one of the case studies there was in Italy, where they have a mudslide on one right down into the village, and they've actually set up warning systems now because thousands of people had died because all of a sudden it rains, they get floods, and then the mud literally slides right down and kills thousands of people. So there are warning systems that have been set up, particularly in this particular code, to prevent that type of, or at least give people warnings to those types of disasters. So this case study was in Copenhagen, Denmark. It was actually one of my favorite in terms of what I was able to capture from it, because their approach was, can an adaptation strategy plan be turned into green growth, innovation, and employment? So the way they spun it, the angle that they put on, how do we take this disaster? And this picture was from what they call a cloudburst they had in 2011, severe flooding that flooded the whole city of Copenhagen, where the manholes actually were lifted off. So that's how much water they got, and that's just one of the images. The damage was 67 million euros, and this was just one of 3 severe rainfall events in 12 months of 2011. So they had to take some action. But to look at it from the angle of how do we turn this into something that we can benefit from? How do we brand the fact that we can become a city with full water? 10,000 people a year move to Copenhagen. Okay. So they invested 15 million euros before new legislation was even passed on what to do about this. So they were very proactive. This initiative, they formed several initiatives, the Cloudburst Initiative, which you can Google, and the Danish Water Forum. And one of the angles that the team had presented, the entire staff of this particular department flew in to present this. There were teams from Taiwan that flew in, there were teams from Denmark, La Paz, Mexico. They had staff that would come in and present these case studies for us to learn. But this angle of policy challenge, so rain falls on the road, and she says that's sewage money. You pay for that, your water and sewer. But when rain falls into the lakes, you can't fund it with water management money. You couldn't fund it with any money. So it's like, well, it's not my job, it's not my job, it's not my job. Rain didn't fall here, but it's all just rain that's coming down. It's just funded through different channels. And so they had to work, they looked at that angle of, okay, well, it's rain. It just depends on where it's falling in terms of how we're going to deal with it, and having to make policy changes so that it could be addressed, whether it falls in the lakes, whether it falls on the roads, so that the problem could be addressed as almost a turnkey solution through policy setting. So it was a very, very impressive, and you can actually find your presentation for this and the whole report from ICLEI, the conference, online. So to answer that question of whether you can use adaptation strategy to promote green growth and promote investment in your city, they're branding it that a climate-proof city is more attractive to invest in. A resilient community secures existing investments and attracts new investment. Adaptive capacity is a competitive advantage, and cities capable of protecting businesses and citizens from climate-related threats are more attractive places to live, work, and invest. So they are using adaptation strategy and their capacity to deal with the flooding and to deal with a natural disaster that happens to them regularly with rain to become a competitive advantage. Mainstreaming resilience was another term that, if you Google it, you won't see a whole lot on the term of mainstreaming resilience. But basically, what it is when you make it part of your overall, with Copenhagen did, it became part of their overall plan of attracting business, of attracting investment, of providing green jobs. And it allows cities to take advantage of synergies between communities, even between departments, where they were solving the problem of, this is the water fell in the lake, so we're not going to use that money for it. And it makes the unfamiliar familiar. There was a lot of discussion about, we're not sure how to handle this. You know, this is, the rise in natural disasters is something that, you know, when you look at it globally, you can see that it's problematic. I mean, it's costing millions and millions and billions of dollars for people around the world to solve floods and tsunamis and hurricanes. And working together on trying to come up with solutions was really one of the key themes. This was and I have a book for each of you in my office, the World Disaster Reduction Campaign. It is an international program that basically works to, it says, convince local governments, or really support local governments, making your cities more resilient. And if you go to the next slide, this is the name of the campaign. It's called My City is Ready, Getting Ready campaign. It is something that we could actually support as well. More than 1,000 cities have signed up as of when I had prepared this, when I learned about it in May. It addresses issues of local governance and urban risk. And basically it provides a toolkit for governments to decide, am I ready to deal with a natural disaster? And there's a 10-point checklist in this, as well as a self-assessment tool. So I will, at the break, bring you each, I have a book for each of you. Now, I wanted to also share some of the highlights of the presentation that I gave. I presented probably to about 100 people at the conference. I did speak at this conference, and these are some of the highlights of my presentation. It was called Lessons Learned Using an Integrated Approach to Build a Resilient, Sustainable City, the case of Lake Worth, Florida. And what I expressed was how we were identifying our existing capacities, basically having our power and water generation, waste and waste management, historical preservation. We were an artistic community with cultural and ethnic diversity and had old Florida charm. We have a tropical climate, and which many people were envious of, in a rainy day and in a cold city, and a lot of natural resources. So I talked about how, as at the core, and I have to thank really Mr. Bornstein, our city manager, because he sat with me for about 3 hours in preparing this presentation. So I really do thank you for that. But we worked on nurturing of a conservation mindset, and how that is one of the themes that we have here in our city, that we use education as a component of that. We develop policies and programs around that. We have developed rebates, energy audits and grants, and marketing and outreach, which I think we need to do more of, but in that, of nurturing that. But that is one of the ways that we are focusing on building resilience in our community. And these were what we called sustainability conversions. How we took, for example, Old Bridge Park and converted it to Snook Islands. This was people really enjoyed seeing this. How we could take something and turn it into something completely different. And actually I talked about how we used that material to create artificial reefs, where they took the old bridge down and built this new public use facility. Adaptive reuse, the Cultural Council, how that building had now become the Palm Beach County Cultural Council and the largest cultural council on the East Coast in our downtown. Community revitalization, our old beach building, to what we're going to be doing, opening the casino in October, November. And partnerships and vision. I talked about the $23 million NSP grant and how we've taken some of the spaces in our community, the foreclosed properties, etc., and have used grant money tied in, again, the partnerships that were used to get the money, the $23 million, and how many partners are involved in helping our community with the partnership and vision for the city. And this was an example. I didn't have a picture of the old bocce ball court, but Joe Kroll took the old bocce ball court at Bryant Park and converted outdated park space to an outdoor exercise area. And how these kind of wheels integrate the preservation and conservation of our natural resources, enhancing green and space and livability. We just heard from Erica about that, even with Parks and Recreation, and improving the walkability and bikeability. I mean, we talked about it in the first hour of our meeting about the bike paths and everything. And how we're really working on branding sustainability, that we are project-based with an overreaching sustainability brand and image. So even in our casino building, that it's being done to green standards and what is the LEED certification, thank you. That the $23 million NSP program had the houses are being rebuilt and with a lot of green aspects. So we focus on projects, but we have an overreaching brand of sustainability. Some of the lessons that I shared that we have learned is that we need decisive leadership. We've had visionary leaders and helping make these projects come into reality. That relationships and partnerships have been key with non-government NGOs or non-government organizations, our universities, government and government organizations. The ROS, as they call it, return on sustainability, multi-dimensional creative benefits. How are we getting benefits from these programs? When we were in the New York Times, for example, just a 3-page spread we were in. We've been in the Wall Street Journal. We're getting national press for some of the things that we're doing. Branding and marketing, maximizing assets and investments. Some of the plans I just shared with you about the adaptive reuse and things we've done. And a responsible government. Communicating the flow. Communication flow. and trust. And having an educated citizenry, so we can capture the opportunities that are available in the city and benefit from becoming a resilient community. So, thank you very much. Thank you.
Commissioner Rosa?
Pam, we didn't get a copy of this. Can I get a copy of this? It wasn't in our backup.
It did come late, I sent it under a separate email and uploaded it to the website. I'll make sure that I send it to you.
Okay, and then my question for Commissioner Maldonado, I'm interested in the book that you're going to give us, but the 10 points. Are you going to move forward with that and address if we've got the 10 points?
It's up to staff, I mean, it's really it's for staff to look into.
Okay, because the recommendation was to move forward with that, but I'd like to see how we rate as far as the 10 points and where we are, or what we can do to be rated in on that, where we are with that.
Commissioner Boyd?
Thank you very much for the presentation and for giving us some visibility and learning from what other communities around the world are doing. I think this is somewhat of a theme that's very dear to me. There was just an article today of a scientific study where somebody's trying to look at the trends in extreme weather events. Of course, we're all very aware that a huge number of counties in the U.S. are declared agricultural disaster areas because of drought, and the obvious, and we've been breaking heat records just consistently for the last stretch. And one of the questions that scientists face is, in looking at that, as well, is this just random noise that comes along, or is this something that clearly is related to what we as human beings are doing on the planet? And the consensus isn't there fully on that, but it's pretty clear that the longer we keep breaking these records one after another, it's pretty hard to turn away from linking that to what we do. And I think some of what Commissioner Mulvihill mentioned, that cities all around the world and governments are looking to, moving to the next stage of how do we deal with these expected increases in risk. Did anybody from the presentation happen to say anything about the elevation of Copenhagen? It must be pretty, because they're on water, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
So they're pretty close to sea level, and I know that Denmark is very flat. So the analogies to, I hadn't really thought about it before, but the analogies in terms of water management and stormwater management are pretty strong to our situation, and probably even we're in somewhat worse shape because we have much more intense rainfall here than they do. Even 100 years ago we did. So I am quite concerned about things like stormwater management, how we're going to do that as we get more intense storms and larger magnitude ones. So thank you very much. I hope that we will continue to try to take concrete actions in some of these directions.
Any other questions? One of the things too, I'm also interested in